All right. So we'll take a look at a Mishnah that probably not too many people spent. There's certain Mishnayos, certain statements that get a lot more airtime and credit than others, and there's certain other ones that somehow, they get skipped over. Some manage to get included in a song, so everybody knows them. Certain psukim, some reason everybody knows, and certain other ones they sneak under the radar and we don't notice them. Here's one of those Mishnayos I'm sure people didn't spend a lot of time learning about, talking about, but for some reason, everybody has something that clicks with them, that spend some time thinking about it, and that's really the whole purpose of some of these statements, some of these Mishnayos. Somebody said something, and they said it because they spent time, they went deep into this subject. And sometimes you take one of these subjects, we spoke about it last time, they take one seed, one idea, and it could be life-changing. It's a piece of medicine. Puts on a pair of glasses, a different pair of lenses, that a person can now look at the world in a different way. And if I didn't have reading glasses, I wouldn't be able to read. I'd be blocked out of the world of reading if I didn't have the bottom part of my lenses over here. And sometimes a person learns a Mishnah, and suddenly it opens up your eyes, and it creates a whole new way of experiencing life and seeing other people and other things. And I think this is one of those Mishnayos. It says the following thing in the 4th parak of Perkei Avos, people learning Perkei Avos to prepare for Matan Torah, and also to gain the character improvement. And it says the following thing: Hu Omer, he used to say, Al Tivaz, Al Tehivaz, who's speaking about it over here, this is Ben Azai. Ben Azai, who said in the previous Mishnah, Hevi Ratz le mitzvah kala, go after a small mitzvah, light mitzvah. This is what he said in the previous mitzvah. It's Ben Azai. Uborech min avera, and go away from any avera. She mitzvah gera is mitzvah, because a mitzvah brings about another mitzvah. There's an inertia in mitzvahs, and avera gera is avera, and avera can start a little fire going in the other direction. A person could start going in a downward spiral, because of avera. Shesachar mitzvah, the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. Each of these things is an explanation. Usachar avera, and the reward of the avera is the avera. But in the first part, he's saying over here that even a small little mitzvah can get a person jump started in a certain direction, and a small, slight avera can also get a person going in a certain direction. So that's the same Ben Azai, he says, and it's talking about, and to be careful even with a light mitzvah, because there's no such thing as a light mitzvah. Let me see, it was Parshas Tazria a few weeks ago. My son had his birthday, so I remember it was around that, it was that same Parsha that he made his bar mitzvah, and also remember that I spoke at his bris 27 years ago. I'm wondering, what was the purpose of giving a little child? The first time I went through this experience, we had a little baby, 27 years ago, and the first 8 days into the world, we bring him in for surgery, and we invite all our friends and fill up the table with gefilte fish and cake and bagels and whatnot. We're going to make a celebration about it. What's so nice about that? That you're going to now make a wound on this child. So I was thinking at that time, what's the great benefit? What's the kindliness that comes along with creating this type of a cut onto a child? Avraham Avinu was the pillar of Chesed. Sfas Emes says that it makes sense because Avraham Avinu was specializing in the mitzvah of Chesed. That was his midah. Was Chesed. So every one of the 10 tests that he went through obviously went against and was counter that natural tendency. For Avraham Avinu to serve a deli sandwich, that was not a problem. But for him to afflict somebody, that was the problem. But there has to have been some kind of a chesed shebegvura. There has to be some kind of a chesed, some kindliness, which he understood is embedded and laced into that act of gvura. There has to be something else that's in there. So I had two thoughts at that time. I'm newly married, still learning yeshiva. One idea was the yeshiva was learning Bava Metzia at the time. That is, if you find something, and it doesn't have any siman on it. You find a dollar bill blowing in Times Square. So you pick it up, you put it in your pocket, you say, oh, Today's my lucky day, right? Right? Okay. But today, I'm a dollar richer. Okay, fine, beautiful. So, but if you find something, you find 3/4 stacked up in the base medrash over here, ooh, you know, so it's a simon. The fact that it was piled that way, that means that somebody, you know, put it there in a special order. It wasn't scattered. So if you find, you know, money that has like a little band around it or something like that, it's bundled in a certain way. So we understand that it has a simon on it, right? So something that has a simon on it, then it has to be returned. That means that because it's a sign that not only that the person put it there with purpose, but the owner himself is not misyayish. The owner himself, yir shalom das, right? If someone is yish, it's shalom das. It's because he doesn't have knowledge, right? So that means that the person, the owner didn't give up. So Kodesh Baruch Hu, I wanted to say, puts a stamp onto his children, right? He puts a stamp on them. He puts a simon on every Jewish child, and that simon, number one, is that that Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't give up on any child, no matter what happens to him, no matter where he goes. Kodesh Baruch Hu never gives up on that child, right? The owner, right? The Baal is not miyayish, has not given up. And therefore, he doesn't stop looking. He doesn't give up. So the Kodesh Baruch Hu is putting a bris into that child, because that's the simon that even if he feels that he's lost, he's not lost. Right? And that's when we give somebody even a tanchumen, when we give them to console somebody, we say hamakam. Right? Why hamakam? Because everything's in the Kodesh Baruch Hu's world. Even somebody we think the neshama, it's like somebody get up and left the room. A little child goes, "Oh, mommy left the room. Mommy left the room." It's like a ship sailing over the edge, you know, of the earth when people thought the earth was flat. So somebody who thinks unidimensionally thinks that when the child, he sees out of sight, out of the mind, the person leaves the room. That's it. Forget about it. But when somebody leaves the room, we adults know. You know, I'll be in there in a few minutes. We're just going to finish up the shir, and then we're going to go into the other room also. You know, make a cup of coffee for me too. When somebody leaves the room, when somebody goes into Olam Haba, we're coming there also. You know, so the premise is it's hamakam, because nobody left the Kodesh Baruch Hu's universe. Kodesh Baruch Hu is Makom Shel Olam. He's the place. And that's what we say also the Pesach Seder, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Neged Arba Banim Divrei Torah. The Torah is speaking about 4 children. Why is it also Baruch HaMakom over there? Baruch Misha Nasan Torah Le'emo Yisrael, because it encompasses the Kodesh Baruch Hu, has his eyes on, and includes everything. There's nothing that's lost in the Kodesh Baruch Hu's world. That was one answer I was thinking about at that time, and I spoke about it, remember, at the bris. Pardon me if I quote myself, you know? Yeah. That's why it's very important for teachers, when you're teaching children, to give them a chance to participate and to say, pardon me that I'm not doing it right now in the lecture style, otherwise I'm a hypocrite, you know. But when you're teaching, the more you distribute the work to the kids, I remember as a student, all I remember is what I said, you know. And if a person, yagati matzati, the person has to put his own yagiya in. So I remember one time my Rebbe asked in shir, he said, what do you learn from a clock that's right only twice a day? Yes, that's in shir. He used to throw out like a little riddle, something to think about. You know, clock that, let's say stuck at midnight. So he liked my answer so much, he asked me to repeat it shalashudas in front of the whole yeshiva. And maybe, so since I got a little prize for it, I got a little recognition, I still remember my answer. My answer at that time was that if you see somebody who's drinking on Purim, drinking heavy on Purim, and he's fressing on Erev Yom Kippur, and he's eating a lot on Yom Kippur, he's stuffing himself, that doesn't mean you can learn from him the rest of the year, you know. Don't make him your Rebbe. Sometimes a person is right, happens to be right for the wrong reason at 2 different times. It could be he's drinking all the time, and it could be he's eating all the time, but don't learn from him the rest of the seasons. Those 2 times you happen to catch him, doing something that was appropriate for that particular time, but his reason might not be right. Another reason I want to say that what's the kindly that's in this is the point that I want to make over here is that David HaMelech was the Gemara tells us, found himself in a situation where he went to a bathhouse. Right? He was in the mikveh, and when he was there, he had an anxiety attack. He had a panic attack. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us. What was it? What's the big problem? And the problem is, he looked around, no talis, no tzitzit, right? So he had no mitzvahs around him. He has no he has no tefillin. So there's no mezuzah on the door. So he found himself naked for mitzvahs. And the Mishnah we just read over here says that mitzvah gureris mitzvah, and avera gureris avera. Somebody once told my wife when she was leaving Eretz Israel many, many years ago, when she was going away from seminary back to the United States, the rabbi said, make sure you learn 5 minutes a day. But the girls are learning, all day long. They're in, kolelet over there in seminary. What do you mean only 5 minutes a day? He said, believe me, you learn 5 minutes a day, you're ahead of the game. And he said because when a bird stops flapping its wings, it doesn't stay in the same place. Right? A person's either going up or they're going down. They're not standing in one place anymore. Life is not a snapshot. So he said, he told him, remember, that if you may not realize that you're going down till you see the ground rapidly approaching. But suddenly, and by then it may be too late to catch up. So David HaMelech realized that I must be plummeting fast, because if I don't have any mitzvahs to climb with, right? So it must be I'm on the down escalator. I'm going down. And so what's the anxiety attack? The anxiety attack is because sometimes you need a mitzvah to get started in the world of mitzvahs, right? A person loses his license. The judge goes, license revoked. What? Now I have to go to the DMV. How can I get to the DMV? I don't have a license. I can't drive my car, right? The lights go out. Oh no. What do we do? Oh, I have a flashlight someplace. How do I find the flashlight? I need a flashlight to find the flashlight. You need a light to find a light. Oh, I'm out of a job. Oh, you know what? I'll start a business. Oh, I need money. Oh, how do I get money? Because I don't have any money. So the rich get richer and the poor have children. And we got love, So sometimes you need money to make money. You need a light to find a light. You need a license to have a license. And you need a mitzvah to get started in the career of mitzvahs. So David HaMelech says, I haven't got any mitzvahs. So what am I supposed to do? And then David HaMelech became Sameach, he became happy again. He consoled himself. What was his consolation? I have a bris milah. Kadosh Baruch Hu was koveya a mitzvah into me, and that mitzvah that he fixed into my flesh gives me a jump start into the world of mitzvahs. That anytime I want to start, I have a down payment on a career of mitzvahs that I can get started in. So this is part of Ben Azai's statement over here, is that don't take any mitzvah lightly. That's not a small mitzvah. That's not a mitzvah kala. But it's not something that we did for ourselves. It was something that was granted to us by our parents. It's an inheritance. And every day in benching, I once heard from Rabbi Miller, he says that we have to agree to that. When we bench, we have to agree. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though we didn't do it to ourselves, but we have to be agreeing after the fact that it was a good investment, because that's something that gets us started, to get us jump started into the world of mitzvah. David HaMelech said, I have a mitzvah to get started now get the inertia flowing back in the other direction. I remember I heard a number of years ago, and it fits into the theme of the next mission that I want to talk about. That I heard from a chavrusa that somebody had said over at one of the conventions. I think it was at that time the Torah Masar convention, which was this past week also, and they said over that there was a fellow that was, again, I can't speak to the veracity of this story, but this is what I heard, fresh from a chavrusa of mine who I was learning Yeridei with at the time, and he said he had just heard it at the convention, that there was a fellow that he came out of yeshiva. He was all fiery and excited to give over Torah Shabbal Peh, to teach the way to these young boys in an out-of-town Hebrew day school, and of course, the Hebrew day school, sometimes it's, people, the parents are just depositing their kids there because they don't want them in public school. But don't be, as Jackie Mason says, don't be too religious. Only by Jews it's too Jewish, right? And you never find by Chinese it's too Chinese, or too Indian, or too, whatever it is. By Jews it's too Jewish. They want their kids to be not, be good, be Jewish, but not too much. So there was this fellow came in with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of idealism, and of course he started teaching them right away halachas, and he says, okay, when you get dressed in the morning, you put on your right shoe, right, and then you put on your left shoe. And if you happen to be, because that's the first step that we step forward in Shemon Esrei, we step forward, that's the first step that goes towards mitzvahs, you got it? Right? And then you tie your left shoe, and then you tie your right shoe. If you happen to be a lefty, then you tie your right shoe, then you tie your left shoe. He told him the whole, so the kid comes home, one kid comes home from school, his mother happens to be on the board of the school. I once heard from Rabbi Gifter, he said that a principal with a board, a principal with a beard is a gittazaf. That's good. But the board with the principal, isn't this good, The board. So he said that So this woman, she was the head of the president of the board of directors, and she asked her son, what did you learn today? Right? My mother used to ask me all the time. I used to torture her, say nothing. But sometimes you don't know what you learned. It's incremental. So the kid said, I learned that you put on your right shoe, then you put on your left shoe, then you tie your left shoe, then you tie your right shoe. I said, what? What's that about? She got in touch with some of the other members. Like, what is he teaching our kids? He's teaching this archaic, superstitious, religious. What is that about? And she made a big rule. And what's written in Shulchan Aruch, they fired him. Teach about Judaism, teach about kindliness, teach about those are also nice things. What are you teaching about? Putting on which shoe you put on? What difference does it make? To quote our former Secretary of State, what difference does it make anyway? What difference does it make? You put on your right shoe, you put on your left shoe, you put on your left shoe. What difference does it make? So the guy was dismissed. Okay, he went on. He found himself a job some other place. He moved to a different place, and he found a job. Meanwhile, this kid grew up 8th grade. After 8th grade, he went out to college. He got he went to high school. He did so well in public high school. He ended up going to an Ivy League college, Princeton. He was studying pre-med, and in order to be successful pre-med, he had to take chemistry, but he was struggling in chemistry. So he got a chemistry partner, and chemistry started to develop between him and his chemistry partner, right? It was a young lady, Italian girl, Kathy something or other. Ooh, they start falling in love. The boy comes home, he says, Mom, I want to introduce you to Kathy. What? I'm going to stick my head in the other. Mom, I love her. Okay, if it makes you happy, they plan a wedding. They're making a big wedding, a giant formal wedding. They come to the hotel the night of the wedding. The fellow's about to marry out of Judaism. It's from Avraham Avinu up until him. 3,300 and some odd. Now this year will be 25 years. But who knows back then what it was? And it's the end of the game. And he's sitting there in his hotel room, and he's getting all dressed up. With his black bow tie, his cummerbund, puts on his formal jacket. Now he takes out the box. He's about to put on his formal, shiny wedding shoes. And as he's about to step into the shoes, he says, "Today's my wedding day. It's an important day." He said, "I remember something when you put on shoes. I remember something once that I once heard that when you put on your shoe, you should try to put on your. That's right. You put on your right shoe first because that's the first step that goes towards mitzvahs." Oh my gosh, mitzvahs. Suddenly the word mitzvahs woke up in his mind. What am I doing? I'm about to kill the lineage. I'm the only boy in the family, the name, the this, that, He called off the wedding with Samson's strength, yeah? And then that night, what happened? He didn't show up. He didn't come to the chuppah, And he calls up that night, and he finds out where this Rebbe is. And he gives a call to him, and he tells him, "Hi, my name is Sutton." "Yeah, okay." He said, "Yeah, I had you the first year you were teaching." You remember you taught us to write. My mother was the head of the board of directors, and she's the one that got you fired." He goes, "I forgive you. Don't worry about it." He said, "I moved to another town. I met my wife. I got married." No. I didn't call to ask forgiveness, which I really should. He says, "I'm calling," he says, "to tell you thank you." He says, "Because that little piece that you taught me, it saved my life." I was about to, and he told him what happened. It almost staggers the imagination that such a thing could happen. That it did happen, but apparently that's what happened. So here's the following Mishnah that Hu Hayomer, the same in the world of mitzvahs. Not only is it true in the world of mitzvahs, but he says the following thing. Hu Hayomer Ben Azai says the following thing: Al tihivaz l'chol adam. Don't take any person lightly. Don't treat anybody lightly. Don't be dismissive about any person. And don't separate yourself from anything or any matter. And why is that? Because there's no person that doesn't have his moment. Right? And if something's in this world, if a Kodesh Baruch Hu put it in this world, then everything has its place. Right? Everything has its place. It's meant to be here for some reason. Right? I don't know. I always go with this. There's an emunah that if a Kodesh Baruch Hu put it over here, it's got some purpose for being here. I know until my kids forced me to buy and set up a regular formal sukkah, I used to go down into the basement and say to myself, there's a sukkah down here someplace, and start to pull out things, and somehow it amounted to a sukkah. I would still be doing it today, so my kids say, but you can't, you can't reinvent it. You're not going to hit it every time. I said, I think we can hit it every time. Everything here was meant to be, when you're putting it together, like, oh, here's that final piece. Evan ma'asu habanim haisel rosh pina, that last piece over here that's going to hold the hinge pin, that's going to hold the whole thing together. So I think that the Mishnah over here is very, very powerful Mishnah. And it says, it's telling us the following thing. And it's not just a philosophical answer to a practical question. You know what a philosophical answer to a practical question is? You know what a philosophical answer to a practical question? When Cain killed Hevel, so Kodesh Baruch Hu, chased after him, and he said, what happened to your brother? And he gave a classic answer that nobody would ever give these days, because it's such a foolish answer, right? What did he say? He said, Hashomer Achi Anochi, am I my brother's keeper? It's such a lame excuse. It's almost hard to believe that someone's gonna fire off such a foolish statement like that. Am I my brother's keeper? And it's so dumb. Like, what's he thinking? So the Medrash says this is what he's thinking. That he suddenly became a big philosopher, and he started to say, I couldn't have killed him. It's b'sheret, unless you allowed it. Kodesh Baruch Hu. Shomer Yisrael. Who's the shomer? Who's the shomer of the universe? Kodesh Baruch Hu. He says, if you didn't want him dead, I wouldn't have been able to kill him. So that's why I killed him. So I didn't kill him. In effect, you killed him. You must have wanted him dead. Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashomer Achi Anochi. Am I the shomer's brother? See, he became a big philosopher. That's what we call a philosophical answer to a practical question. It's like a guy comes home, he throws open the closet door, and he sees a guy standing there in his shorts. He says, what are you doing here? And the guy says, everybody's got to be someplace. Yeah? I'm calling 911. What are you doing? What are you doing in my closet over here? Very nice. So Kodesh Baruch Hu said, this is a very practical issue. You killed somebody. Now you're gonna join the blame God crowd over here, right? Now you're gonna blame a Kodesh Baruch Hu. You can't blame a Kodesh Baruch Hu for this one. This is the Torah is educating us about human choice, about bechira. But the mission over here seems to tell us that everything and everybody has their reason for being. There's no extra people on the planet. Right? Sometimes somebody's made to feel, that they're somehow less important, or that somebody, or that somebody, doesn't matter because someone's a mutzlach, someone's successful, and someone's not successful. And sometimes when we take a look at the snapshot in the history of life, who was this person? What was this person? I remember I had my first roommate when I came to yeshiva, more than 32 years ago now. I think this summer it'll be 33 years. I came to Ursameach. I was a walk-on from New York. And when I came to yeshiva, I had a 68-year-old roommate. Yeah. His name was Mordechai Tobin. Listen to this. Mordechai Tobin is his name. He's in Milton. That was his name, Milton. Now, I never like to ask people, tell me your story, because I always felt on the spot when I go out for people, they'd set us up all the time in the Frum Balabatim, and they would ask us, what, did you ever eat bacon? What does it taste like? Tell us your story. So every time you go out to eat, for the price of a bowl of cholent, you'd have to tell over your whole story. Well, I was born in a log cabin. I helped my father build. Sometimes you start to make up a story, whatever it is. I never like to bother anybody else with these type of questions. So I never asked him. But it took me a couple of months to figure something out. Suddenly, his son Michael got engaged, and he came back from Israel. Okay, and they were planning a wedding. It wasn't until the Ufruf. There was a room maybe about 2/3 this size, about the 2/3 the size of this room. That was the whole base medrash or semeach. It was the administration building. We used to turn. And we used to do all the simchas. It was one small little room at Or Semeach in Muncie, and it was at the Ufruf. And his son Michael was telling over his story. Listen to the story. I'll fill in some pieces. His story was, here he was at the Ufruf telling over his story that he had gotten, he and his, what turned out later on to be his bride, Deborah, they were living together. They were in Vermont someplace. They had both gotten their degrees in psychology, in family counseling, although they were not married themselves. And they decided that they're going to go, before they settle down, that they're going to go traveling through Europe, and they're going to, spread their wings and have a little fun. And as they're traveling, a little exploration. So as they're traveling through Europe, and it turns out that she was a Lebanese Christian. She wasn't even a Jew, but she looked, Middle Eastern. And so what happened was, they were in France, and a little old man on a bicycle, when they were traveling through France, suddenly stopped them and said, "You're Jewish?" He says, "Why don't you go to Israel?" They had no plan, no thought, not a hava meaning to go to Israel. Okay, he planted a thought in their mind. Then when they got to Greece, in the Mediterranean, where Israel becomes accessible, suddenly it percolated in their mind that words that man said. And they said, "Let's go to Israel." And they got on a slow boat, on a junket, and they ended up arriving in Israel. They were traveling around in the North Country, in Svat, the mystical, artistic country over there. And suddenly, they bump into a little old man on a bicycle who says, "Why don't you go to Yerushalayim and look into a yeshiva, an Or Sameach, whatever?" I remember at that time, sitting in the room, amongst the crowd of people, cakes and cookies and soda, whatever on the table, kiddush. Reb Nota Shilla, the dean of Or Sameach in Yerushalayim, one of the most elegant, incredible fundraiser also, but an incredible, deep Talmud Chacham. He was sitting with his arm draped around the chair. Maybe some people heard of Joe Tannenbaum. If you go to Eretz Israel, you see many, many buildings. Joe and Faye Tannenbaum, Boys Town, Joe and Faye Tannenbaum, Or Sameach campus. He one of the most outstanding, one of the most generous person. I remember Joe very, very well. He used to come visit the yeshiva. Uncle Joe used to go. He was one of the most generous, one of the all-time philanthropists of all time. Joe Tannenbaum, unbelievable person. And Reb Nota Shilla was sitting there with his arm draped around Joe's chair, and I remember him saying audibly at that time when they started talking about the second guy, a little old man on the bicycle, he says, "Joe, you have no idea how expensive it is to put these little men on bicycles all over the world." Anyway, he went on to say that. So he said, "Okay." So they ended up going down south to Yerushalayim. He checked into Or Sameach, she checked into Neve. They both stick their heads out and said, "This is darn interesting." They went go back in, and she says, "I think I'm going to stay for a while because this is something I have to explore." She ended up converting to Judaism. He ended up investing himself in learning, and for the next 6 months, they were packing away and learning. Meanwhile, the old man, his father, who had supported him and brought him through school, the psychology school, and now finally, he's going to start to reap the dividends of the education. He finds out that his kid went, skipped to Israel. He ended up in a cult, in Jerusalem. So he called him up. He said, "I'm going to come get you out of there. We got to come back to your senses already." And so he came to get his son out at the age of 68 years old. He said, "Dad, before I go," he says, "why don't you sit in on one of the shiurim?" He sat in one of the classes, and right away the old man starts to challenge and fight. He said, "Oh, we got a live one here. The ones who sit there and bob their heads, that's not what you want. You want the ones who are going to, who are going to be a little oppositional." And he took him to the Gemara class, and he said he had an opinion, and they proved him that, and they had a whole logical discussion. Boom, 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 boom. It was a boxing match. He goes, "Oh, this is interesting." He liked the fighting. He was a feisty guy. And he said, and he says, "You know something? I like this. I see what you like about it." He ended up staying in yeshiva himself for the next 3.5, 4 months. He says, "I have an apartment back that I'm paying in Lower Manhattan. I have to sublet it. I have to sign a contract. I have to, and I want to continue learning. Where can I continue?" They just opened up Or Sameach in Monsey at that time, and so he came back to New York, and he ended up arriving at Or Sameach. A few months later, I arrived, and I was his roommate. His son got married. I remember, it was a beautiful wedding. It was amazing. All the tzaddikim in Monsey, everybody that was, anybody came to that wedding. It was a very, very special event. And then afterwards, it was exhausting. So the old man, my roommate, he disappeared for a week. I didn't even know where he went. Apparently, he went down to Florida to convalesce. The day he came back, I remember there was a bris in the yeshiva. And so they set up the tables for the bris after davening, and then they were putting things back. And my room with him was right across just a few feet away from the base medrash. And we sat down, we went back, and while things were getting set up, recalibrated, we used to play chess. He would drink a l'chaim, smoke a cigarette, and we would sit and talk. Now, I'd been in yeshiva for a couple of months, and I felt like, when it came to learning, it was like throwing matches at a frozen log. It was like it wasn't catching on. I kept on wondering, why did if the ox gored another ox, first of all, I don't have an ox. Second of all, I don't know anybody who has an ox. Third of all, what does it matter that an ox gored? And why don't they just teach the ox not to gore another ox? And my Rebbe would yell at me, "That's a Beis Yaakov question." And I didn't understand what we were doing over there and why we were doing. I came to find spirituality, to find God. Forget about it. Now they're telling me about an ox that gores another ox, and he fell into a hole, and oh my God, and it wasn't 10 feet deep, 10 tvachim, and he survived, didn't survive, and the kalim, and oh my God, get me out of here. I didn't know what they were talking about. And I told him, I'm thinking about leaving, and I'm going back to. I remember he shouted at me at that time. He said, "Label, if I was you," he says, "I would stay and learn." But he said it in such a way that none of the Rebbeim would ever say it. And it was like, okay, anytime I had a thought to leave, I could hear his voice, I could see his face in front of me barking, I would stay and learn. He looked at me like someone who was jealous that you're young. Although I felt like, maybe my time had passed. I was 24 years old, but he was looking at me 68 years old. I'm still crawling with the Hebrew over here. He says, "I just came back from Florida," he told me at that time. "I just came back from Florida." He says, "And there," he says, "I saw the Judaism that I left behind. Everybody's playing shuffleboard and waiting for the Malach HaMaves." He says, "This is where it's at." And that's what he told me. He says, "If I were you, I would stay." He says, "Here I am, 68 years old, and I never felt more hope in my life than I feel right now." He says, "I want to get married." His wife had passed away many years ago. He was a widower. And so he went to the Rebbeim after that conversation, I remember, and he said, where do I begin to find the shidduch? So, someone had, one of the Rebbeim advised him, take out an ad in the Jewish press. He took out 2 lines in the Jewish press, 68-year-old Baal Tshuva, looking for a shidduch, okay? And lo and behold, a Hasidic fella in Borough Park, who was a television repairman, okay? Happened to be repairing a television, and he sees open on top of the television, he sees this, and he reminds himself that he has a sister, and they had a father who had learned the last 20 some odd years of his life, and he has a sister who was the secretary in Philadelphia, yeshiva at the time, and she's a widow. So he arranges the shidduch. I remember he used to go to New York and beat 2 or 3, prospects at one time. And next thing you know, within a couple of weeks, he's engaged. I was the only baruch at the wedding. He got married. I remember, since I was the only one there, I was a shomer. It was the first time and the last time I remember I've been shomer. I've been also the aid yichud many times. First time and only time we couldn't keep the chassan in the yichud room for the 8.5 minutes. He kept on coming out. Can we get a cigarette? Can we get a cup of coffee? Now we got to start the 8.5 minutes again. The poor photographer kept on delaying everything. It was at that time he smoked. He used to have a coffee. He had all these vices. We have to keep on pushing him back into the yichud room. We'll start the 8.5 minutes again. Anyway, Baruch Hashem, he got married. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky gave him a bracha. He had like a little chin beard at the time. You grow your beard long. For some reason, he told me you'll have a reichas yamin. He ended up moving to Eretz Yisrael. And I went to visit there a few times. I used to work for a Sameach. I used to go over and see him. I brought my children over. They call them Bubby and Zadie Tobin. And Michael ended up moving to Eretz Yisrael. The family was around him. And he sat there day and night for the last 20 some odd years of his life. And he hocked away. And he mastered a number of Masechtas, even though, he felt that, he had to say a Borei Nefashos, he took out a piece of paper and a Shei Yetzar, not just for Frumkeit, he took out a paper because he couldn't remember any of the brachas. So, but he pushed himself and he pushed himself. And all the guys at Or Sameach who felt like they were rejects from their parents because they're wondering, what are you doing over there? What are you doing over there? He told them also, he would take them home. He was like the grandfather, he was the Zaidi, he was the father, the Bimkom, the parents who had rejected their children. Like, oh, this daughter became frum, and this son became frum. And the Reform rabbi says, you better check the mezuzah, find out what you did wrong. Your children are becoming frum. What's going on over here? So he was the one that was taking them under his wing. And who knows how many people he told, if I was you, I would continue to learn. Who knows how many people he gave the same encouragement and the same push that he gave me. And then one summer, a friend of mine came back from Eretz Yisrael, and he handed me a tape. He put a tape into my hand. And I looked at it, and oh my gosh, my heart fell into my stomach. And I got a double shock. And the double shock I got was, number one, he said, you didn't know Label? I said, no. The tape said, Shloshim, for the Hesped, for the Shloshim of Mordechai Tobin, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, from the Or Sameach tape library. The first wave I got was, I didn't hear. He said, oh, I thought you knew. I said, no. That's the first time I'm hearing about it. Wow. When? He said, yeah. He said, he just quickly, it went, I can't believe it. And the second wave of shock I got was, I saw there, typed out in the official yeshiva, cover that they had of it, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Wow. Take a look at that. Here's a guy starting out at 68 years old, crawling through the Aleph base, hardly remembering from his own bar mitzvah. It was maybe not even bar mitzvah. And not knowing Hebrew, not knowing Aramaic. And eventually he stopped smoking, he stopped with the L'chaims, also got clean, became a Zaidi to so many people, encouraged so many people, that he should end up with the Zecher Tzadik Levracha. What was the likelihood of that late starter? That he should end up with a Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Halavai. Even if you want to say, it's a rabbi, it was an exaggeration. Halavai. Somebody should aim such an exaggeration, at any one of us that's sitting over here, that we should be worthy of a title, a Zal maybe, Zecher Levracha, maybe, but a Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Wow. That somebody should end up with such a title like that. It's not likely. But again, through his own exercise and his own bechira, he put himself into a special category. And who knows how many people he encouraged, and how many people, who knows how much he meant to those people without even realizing what it was that he meant. We have a young fella, I ask my kids, who's your hero? Who's your hero? Who's a Lamed Vav? I ask my boys, they've been to yeshivas. Some of them are big Lamdanim too, but they can be cynical because you see, and you see, and you know, and you see through, So they give one name, okay, they give another name. Happens to be a fella in our neighborhood. They adopted 3 Down syndrome children, right? So I was telling my son this particular part of the story. I was telling him one time that there's a principal of the largest school in Muncie. And he was telling me one time, I was walking from shul, and I was telling my son, I said that this rabbi was telling me, he said that he was walking with Shmuel Feivelson, who was also one of the big Rosh Yeshivas, Zalzang Stark at Meir Vestry, that he was walking with him one time, Rosh Yeshiva, and very stark Yeshivish fellow, and he says, I've come to the conclusion after these many years, he says that a person can be a tzaddik. He says, even if he wears a pink shirt and white pants, And he says, and just as he was saying it, this fellow who adopted these 3 Down syndrome children, he and his wife, they're the most sweet, humble, self-effacing people. These kids are so beloved to the whole community. He was walking out of the house at that time, And as the Rosh Yeshiva was like just walking, not looking around, and he was saying those words, this fellow walked out of the house wearing white pants and a pink shirt. So as I was telling my son the story one Shabbos, suddenly that young principal was walking by, And I said, Rabbi Simon, come here. I said, I was just telling my son, and he sasaid, can you tell the story? And we were intersecting at that moment over there, and he says, yes. And he confirmed the whole story exactly as we said. We were walking past this fellow's house. I'm not saying at that moment he came out with a white pants and a pink shirt again, but it was, just as we're telling such a story. His boy, one of the boy, Rafi, we daven at the same table on Shabbos. He's a Down syndrome boy. Down syndrome boy. He sits at this end of the table, and I'm sitting at this end of the table. And he sits there, and there's a tabletop stender. He comes over, he brings over 4 or 5 svarim that are like, I don't know 3 people in the planet who can understand what these svarim are about. Like obtuse, like things from the top of the shelf, and he puts them there, and he looks at them, he's thumbs through them during the whole davening. When he's not when he's not davening, he's looking at the words of these svarim. Who knows what he sees there? I don't know what he sees. What he doesn't see, if it's something, what he's mimicking, I don't know what. So what happens? I come to davening, and the table stender is over by my seat over here. I said, okay, I don't know if he comes. He's usually the gabbai, Shani, putting covering up the Sefer Torah. And I said, when he comes, I'll put it over to him. Meanwhile, I have a table stender over here. So when I come over, he walks in, I bring over the stender to his spot. He goes, no, Rabbi Lam, you keep it, Rabbi Lam. You keep it for you, Rabbi Lam. And I said, no, Rabbi Lam, when you have it. Oh! And he insists so much that I said, I can't argue. I got to put it over here, and I put it over here. I keep it. Then when I'm standing, meanwhile, middle of Sukkot Zimra, and I see that the chair where I'm sitting is one of these like not so good collapsible chairs, one of these weak folding chairs, and the rest of them maybe something like a more gesund type of chair. Where he's sitting, he comes over and he says, oh, I like this chair. And he comes over and he takes he takes the weak collapsing chair and he brings it over to himself. And he brings over the chair that he's sitting, which is the stronger, more comfortable chair, and he brings it over to me. And I wasn't able to rebuff and repel his. And it took me a moment it dawned on me that here is this Down syndrome kid. That maybe he'll be always a Down syndrome kid. He outsmarted me and he out-cheseded me. Okay, if there's such a word like that, He was able to give me a chair and take a chair for himself and say that he wanted it. He was able to repel the gift of the table stender and say, no, I want you to have it. I don't need it. I like it like this. Al tivaz l'chol adam. Don't take anybody lightly. Al tiflak m'chol davar. And don't separate yourself from anything. Because everybody has their importance over here. Sometimes we're looking at things so superficially. Who happens to be sitting up at the dais or whatever. But this is what my boys are telling me. He says, who's a lamed vav? This is a lamed vav over here. So much love, so much concern. And what did they put into this kid? That's what got into his nefesh over here. That's the chinuch that he got. That can only come from people who care that much and taught people to care that much. It's unbelievable. It's a Sefer Torah. I have to tell you, I feel compelled to tell you, since it was on this subject, I heard Rabbi Moshe Weinberger from Woodmere told us a story one time that there was a fellow Down syndrome boy in the shul, and this boy used to get very excited when it came time. He says in shul he would take one person's hand and put together with another kid's hand, another person's hand, and he'd go and he'd get excited in shul. That's what he liked to do. This kid likes to cover the Sefer Torah and uncover the Sefer Torah. Last week when my son was there, we were walking back from shul, and this boy Rafi was walking with us. And and I said, we got to the top of the block. Instead of making a left towards his house, he made a right, and he's going another direction. I said, Rafi, where are you going? You live? He's going to another shul. He says, I have another on the Gavai Sheni in another shul, Hasidic Shneebel. He goes there because they're getting to the reading of the Torah now. He's got a second job. He's the Gavai Sheni. This particular Moshe Weinberg telling us the boy in their shul, and I think I know who he is. That he's the one who he used to put people's hands together. That was his special thing. He used to like to put people's hands together and clap. Oh, he gets so excited. He says one time, he says they were at a wedding, And and this boy who was at the wedding, instead of taking two guys' hands and putting them together, electricity, somebody who's a psychologist or a sociologist who wants to analyze it, said, oh, he sees people shaking hands, and he realizes that's an exciting event, and therefore it anchors that, and that gives him a certain power and a feeling of connectivity, and yeah, thank you, please go back and write your thesis some other place, so he says one time, he says this boy, he takes one of the balabatim by the hand. Instead of connecting to the guy right next to him, he starts to schlep him. He starts to pull him, and he's pulling him and pulling him and pulling him. And the guy doesn't want to resist because you got this kid that's pulling him like where are you taking me? And he's like, he knows exactly where he's taking him. He pulls him completely over to the other side. A huge wedding. Many tables away. He goes to a certain table and he goes around the bend of the table like he knows exactly. He puts him into the hand of another guy. He puts their hands together, goes. He starts getting more excited than ever. These two fellows look up at each other. Their eyes fall to the ground. They give a swallow. They sit down and they're talking for the next 2.5 hours. The wedding. Everybody's dancing, and these two, they're chirping away. At the end, what happened? People, what was that about? Everybody has one eye over there. What was that? These are two guys that used to be friends years ago. Something happened. Something got between them. They stopped talking. They stopped looking. They stopped asking. An ice wall started to develop. Suddenly, if you don't say hello to somebody for 3 days, the Gemara already says it's counted an enemy. This is already now many years passed by. And they became sonim, they became enemies. And there was no way that they were going to reconcile. Until this fella, when they brought them together, he put their hands together. They couldn't remember what they were upset by, what it was that had made them into being not interested in each other. They started catching up on who had what, and who had children, and this and that. And they sat there, and at the end of the night, they exchanged numbers, they hugged, and they cried, and they became friends after that. Who would have thought that such a kid like this, like a Rebbe, would be able to make peace, like Aaron Cohen, was able to put people together like that. But so the Mishnah says, "Al tivaz l'chol adam, al tiflak l'chol davar." I'll tell you a story. There was a fella in there. What's that? They know more. The Chazon Ish should stand up for these type of people. But I'll tell you something else. I have a picture at home. I have a picture of a guy with a bird on his shoulder. Maybe some people heard the story because but I heard it from the fellow that it happened to. For many years I worked with Arachim. Maybe some people heard of Arachim. Arachim in Eretz Israel is huge. All the discovery seminars, whatever, all these things, they all came from the work that went into demonstrating that the Torah has veracity, the Torah has truth, has teeth, and being able to demonstrate scientifically, logically, empirically to the scientific Western mind. A couple of Israeli scientists got involved with this, but there was a fellow that I know who's the head of the organization. His name is Yossi Vallis. Okay, and Yossi Vallis himself told me this story. And he showed me a picture. He says what happened was at home he has a bird, and the bird is called a tuki. A tuki is not like it's not an ordinary like a chirp chirp chirp. It's a talking bird. It's a very sophisticated talking bird, an expensive talking bird, and it imitates and mimics everything like a tape recorder, everything that's going on in the house. You never know what it's going to pick up on and what it's going to lock onto. You never know. He said one time he made a mistake. His wife dropped a stack of plates. He says klutz, and then the bird's going klutz, klutz, klutz. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that in front of the bird, like in front of the children. You don't say certain things. I called up a parent today. A kid said the most nivel peh. A little pre-1A kid said the most nivel peh language. I called up his father. He says we're in front of a pizza shop and there were a couple of from kids out there and they were saying these words. He says, and I should have told him that it's not something. He says, and that's where he heard it from. He was standing out in front of a pizza shop, and the kid heard these words. I can't even tell you the words. I asked the kid who said, I said, what did he say to you? I asked the kid who said he told me bad words. I said, what did he say? No, oh my God. And there was another kid in the office. His kid said, I closed my ears. I said, how did you know to close your ears? And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I heard those words being spoken today. So he said the bird would say, "Bring," if they make a sound like the phone was ringing in the house. Manishma, what's going on? How are you? You know, Yom HaShishi. The bird would say everything that was going on in the house. He would repeat it exactly, all the language in the house. So one day, they would clip the words of the birds, the wing of the birds, and they would fly all over the place. They would leave it around because it couldn't fly. But apparently the wings grew back. And the kids were in the backyard one time, and they were fixing something on the Dud Shemesh, and a hot spritz of water came out, and the bird, felt imperiled, and he flew up to the top of a tree. His wings grew back. Now he's disoriented. They don't see. And then he started flying. Now he's flying. He flew to another tree. And they go, oh, he's in another backyard. And they go to chase him. And now suddenly he flies away altogether. He lost the bird. They told the father, we lost the bird flew away. They put up signs all over the place looking for the bird. They got word that the bird was heard outside of a hospital room in Ranana, where they lived, and then it was actually outside of Yossi's mother's house on the porch. She said, Monishma. She said, I think I heard Yossi out on the porch, and then and then he flew away. I don't know. It was like, that's a weird part of the story, but and it disappeared. A year went by, and the kids were mourning the loss of their bird, and they were arguing with the father and said, please, Abba, can you get us another bird? Can you get it? He said, it's cost thousands of dollars, and and he's holding back, and eventually after a year went by, he went and he bought a new bird. And the day he bought the bird, he went to the Misrad, he went to the office, Arachim, and one of the people at the coffee machine tells him, says, there's a family that hosts Chugei Bayit. And this fella, a lot of people are coming through their house, and they're coming through the home sessions. They're being invited and encouraged to go to seminars, and they're filling up the seminars with their friends and their neighbors. The whole neighborhood it's a mafecha, it's a revolution in that neighborhood, all from this house. And they have a bird, and the bird, whenever we send the lecture, is punctuating every lecture, with statements. It's hysterical to have a bird commenting in the middle of the lectures. The bird is incredible. He says, you should give this guy a call because he's in our business, so to speak. He's part of our community of helping friends. And he has a bird, so you have a hobby. And some people, you have common hobbies like that. So, yeah, I'd like to give him a call, talk shop with him. So he gives a call to this fellow, and he tells the fellow, he says, yes, he said, how long have you been into the talking bird business? The fellow says, listen, I went to seminar, a little more than almost a year ago. He says, and that's about the time. He says, I also came to and I've had a bird for about a year. Yes, he says, yeah, I lost my bird about a year ago. We were playing in the backyard, and the thing flew away. He says, and it was missing a toe on the right foot. Suddenly the guy gets very quiet in the conversation. A couple of days later, Yossi's driving with his son to take him out on a shidduch, to Yerushalayim, to drop him off for a shidduch. And suddenly he gets a phone call. The guy says, I think I've got your bird. He says to the son, we're going to postpone the shidduch. He turned around. That's another unbelievable part, whatever. And he came running right to this guy's house. And he stuck his finger into the cage. He went home, got the cage. He stuck his finger into the cage, and which is a dangerous thing too, because this thing could clamp on. It could do damage. And he licked his finger. And then he brought them home in a cage. And the bird, as the kids passed by, said something relevant to each one of the kids. This was their bird. There's no question about it. All this simonim, were there that this is their bird. And the fellow called up and filled in the rest of the story. He says, I want to tell you. He says, I feel bad. He says, it took me a couple of days to come to myself. I called up my Rav. He told me I have a mitzvah of Hashabbos Aveda. When you mentioned that it's missing a toe, and it's a year ago, I said, this has to be your bird. He says, but I have sentimental attachment to the bird. And he says, what happened was, it turned out it was like something like it was like a couple of weeks after the bird had gone missing. They figured out exactly how many weeks, I forget just now. He says the bird was found lying on a soccer field and on Shabbos, and there's a bunch of people playing soccer over there, and someone said, oh, there's a dead bird here, throw him. He said, no, it's not dead. How do you know it's dead? And it's not just a bird, it's like a special bird. And they felt like, it's still alive. They said, what do we do? So this guy happened to be sensitive to animals, so they got in touch with him. They brought the bird to his house, and he started feeding the bird with an eyedropper. The bird sat up on his perch, And he said, Yom Hashishi Vayuchol, he starts making Kiddush, Baruch Hashem, the bird says, Manishma, the bird's saying all the things that he heard in the house. And people got spooked out. The secular Israeli people, and they said, the bird knows about Hashem. The bird knows about God. The bird, this is the devil. It's an angel. What is going on over here? They got so spooked out that they saw some signs that there was a lecture going on. They eventually began to explore. They ended up coming to a lecture or two. Chugei Bayit. They ended up going to a seminar. They became convinced that the Torah is true. And they realized that, they turned their family around, their children ended up going yeshiva, and it made a revolution in their lives. They started inviting people over their house. He says, this bird changed so many people's lives. It changed their lives. He says, when he told me that when I realized it's your bird, I didn't want to give it up. I have a sentimental attachment to the bird. But I have a mitzvah of Hashabbos Aveda to return the right. It's a Rabbi. He told me that's what I have to do. Unbelievable. Truth is stranger than fiction. When I heard that story, I'm thinking later on, I said, so what do you learn from that story? It's cute, right? Truth is stranger than fiction. I once saw a sign that someone goes into a cartoon, someone going to a library and they have one arrow that points fiction, and the other arrow says stranger than, So what happens, sometimes truth is stranger and more organized than fiction. So I was thinking 3 lessons. Number 1 lesson that you learn is that somebody who's in Kiruv, and they think that they're doing I made this person from, I made that. Baloney. A bird could do the job. Okay? You should, don't take yourself so seriously. I did this. I said that to him. I said that to him. I can tell you my story. It was a black fellow in the Bronx, who said, "You're a son of Abraham," and that did more for me than all the years of Hebrew school. You don't know. What somebody might say to you that might be the turn on. Here was a bird. A bird did a trick over here. But you see something else, and that is, Gemara tells us that there was, in the end of Masechta Sukkah, that there was a family that was called Bilga. Right? There was a daughter named Miriam Bas Bilga. And they locked her family's window. They locked the locker. They couldn't get to their stuff to do the vote in the Beis Hamikdash. What did they do so wrong? And Miriam, some say it was Mary. That lady, Mary, yeah. And that somehow she banged on the altar with her shoe, and she said, "Wolf, wolf, how long will you consume the Jewish money? You waste Jewish money for based on all the korbanos that are being lost. Like you're spilling blood, you're spilling animals over here. So she had a disparaging view on the korbanos, her father and her family. So what did the father do? What did all the fathers of Kohen and the brothers Kohanim and what did they do wrong? The daughter, because if she was speaking that way, then it must have been a trickle-down attitude from the father coming down. Another day we just got rid of another. We just wasted another $1 million worth of sheep in the Beis Hamikdash today. It was an attitude that came from them. If the mother and the family members had been speaking differently in the house, right? Can you imagine the bird would have spoken differently when he woke up? And the people would not have been impressed. They would not have heard what they heard, and life would have been different, right? But the bird was speaking because that's the way the people were speaking. And the third thing I was thinking about, the third lesson, is that Reb Tzadok Cohen says that if a person loves a Kodesh Baruch Hu, right, which part of loving a Kodesh Baruch Hu, if you like a movie, you want to share it with a friend. If you like a good book, you say, if you like a good vort, I want to share it with somebody. If you learn to love a Kodesh Baruch Hu, Avraham Avinu was considered one of the lovers of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he wanted to share with other people. Let me turn you on to who's the greatest artist of the world. Kodesh Baruch Hu is the greatest artist. Let me open up your eyes. Ein Tzayar Kelokenu. There's no artist like Hashem. Look at that sunset. Look at that sunrise. Look at that fruit. Look at that. Who made that face? Look at that beautiful face. Who's the greatest artist in the world? Hashem is the greatest artist in the world. And he turned people on because he loved the Kodesh Baruch Hu, because he realized the Kodesh Baruch Hu is Tachas HaTov Lehetiv, is ultimately good. So if you love somebody, so one of the levels is loving Kodesh Baruch Hu b'chol me'odecha. So one of the perushim of b'chol me'odecha is b'chol mamoncha, with all your money. Reb Tzadok Cohen says, what does it mean to love a Kodesh Baruch Hu with all your money, with all your possessions? It means that if you love a Kodesh Baruch Hu, like Pinchas ben Yair had a donkey that wouldn't eat tevel, right? That wouldn't eat non-kosher food. And he was sensitive to it. He could tell if the meiser had been taken from it or not. That if a person loves a Kodesh Baruch Hu enough, that even his animals will do his work. Will be Shomer Torah mitzvahs. So here's a person who's involved himself, who had gone so deeply and is involved with Kiruv and trying to share with the Kodesh Baruch Hu the emes of Torah, ad kedei kach, to the extent that even his bird ended up doing Kiruv. Right? So a person's children. I remember one time we went to an event in New Jersey someplace, talking about you never know what's going to affect somebody. And this woman mentions to my wife, she goes, hi, Mrs. Lam. I said, yes. How you doing? You remember my name is, I said, yeah. I was at a seminar 3 years ago. I said, okay, I go to a lot of seminars. I don't remember, everybody, but, hi, how you doing? So she says, I remember that time you had little twins. And I says, oh yeah, I remember. She just gave birth to twins, and we went to a seminar like shortly after that. Yeah, I remember that. Certain things. It was difficult, and I remember coming with the kids to the seminar. And she said, I have to tell you something. She says, I was down on religion. I was down on relationships. I was down on everything. And I remember I saw you standing there holding those two little babies, and I came over to talk to you, and I looked at one of them. I don't remember which one, and it went dee dee dee, like this, I went over to one of them, and she grabbed my finger. And when she grabbed my finger, she says something inside of me melted. He says, I went running back to my room. He says, and I didn't attend any more lectures after that. My wife says, oh, I'm so sorry. No. She says, I realized, I want that. I want that for myself. And I got more serious about all these things. And she pointed, this is 3 years later, she goes, I want to show you over there. She goes, that's my husband, at that table over there, and those are my two children, So it wasn't my lectures. My wife doesn't remember, like both my daughters my twin daughters want to say, it was me. No, it was me. But it doesn't matter. Sometimes it was the little grip, it was the little touch of a child that could make such a huge difference. We don't know. There's so many different things in this universe. I'll just maybe tell two more quick stories. One of my rebbeim once told us just a short few years ago. He said, he's a man in his 70s already. And he said when he was a little boy, he was walking in the country. He was walking in the country with his father, who was an old European Jew from Switzerland, who came over before the war with a few dollars in his pocket, just a few dollars in his pocket, and within 6 months, he started the largest Beis Yaakov here in Brooklyn. He started a school. He started a business. He was a businessman. He became a huge businessman. And he started a yeshiva and started a business, and he became very successful. He was walking in the country with his son, who's a huge Talmud Chacham, someone who passed the pin test all the way down, tell you which word in the Talmud you'll hit when you put the pin through the Talmud. So he was a precocious young fellow, and he was walking with his father in the country. He was a big businessman, and walking along with them was this German fellow, he says, also a European fellow, who was hacking away, who was trying to sell his father something about opportunities in Wisconsin. Boy, Wisconsin this, Wisconsin that. In Wisconsin, there's so much happening in Wisconsin these days. It's a new frontier. Wisconsin. I don't know, he's looking maybe for an investor, who knows what. So the European crowd, children should be seen and not heard. It's a different world, different than the American crowd. Yeah? He was an American boy, grew up in American soil. So as they're walking along, so he's listening to all this Wisconsin. So he used to read the encyclopedia. He read a lot. He knows a lot. Precocious kid. He says, I jumped into the conversation. I said, what's the big deal about Wisconsin? He says, Wisconsin has more cows than it does people. The population of Madison is, he starts giving some facts about Wisconsin. I can't imagine what could be so big about Wisconsin. It's such a small, This fella got so put off, this German, he started saying, what you don't know, he gave him an upbraiding. Don't talk about. What you don't know, don't talk about. And he shouted into his face, almost verbal abuse, until he was microwave on the inside. He says for weeks it took him to compose himself after that from this shouting and this abuse, in front of his father that he received. What you don't know, don't talk about. And he has a very happy and happy disposition. He said, but that was a trauma event for him. That this fellow shouted at him so many times and so violently into his face. What you don't know, don't talk about. Why does something like that happen? Who knows why people have to go through things. 60 some odd years later, He has an elderly mother. His father's passed into the Olam HaEmes. He has a mother. She passed away last year. She's in her high 90s. She's at home with an ozeret, with a helper, and a nurse. And suddenly they get a call from the ozeret, from the helper, that says, it's Erev Shabbos, says, your mother's blood pressure went down, her temperature is high, I don't think we should let it go into Shabbos, we better do something. I think I want to take her to the hospital. And we'll meet you over there. They call an ambulance, they take her to the hospital. He goes over on Shabbos, right before Shabbos, to go meet his mother in the hospital. They take her in, they start right away trying to figure things out, what's going on. The doctor comes out, the physician, lab coat, stethoscope in his pocket, and he says, Rabbi, is your mother allergic to penicillin? So he thinks to himself, I'm not allergic to penicillin. None of my brothers and sisters are allergic to penicillin. I never heard that my mother is allergic to penicillin. And he's about to say with certainty that she's not allergic to penicillin, when suddenly, from the past, from 60 years ago, he's arrested, he's tackled from behind by a voice that says, what you don't know, don't talk about. What you don't know, don't talk about. He arrests himself, he stops in the middle of his sentence, and he says, I really don't know, and I can't say with certainty that my mother is not allergic to penicillin. Doctor says, okay, we'll check up her medical record. They contact and they find out. He comes out a few minutes later, your mother is allergic to penicillin. Can you imagine, had he said that his mother was allergic to not allergic to penicillin, and based upon his statement, they would have given to a fragile, aged woman a penicillin, he would have brought about the early demise of his own beloved mother, even to steal one moment of life away from his mother. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, "Yafa sha'acha shel tshuva ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh." Even that one moment of tshuva and ma'asim tovim in this world is greater mikol chaya olam haba, in the whole olam haba. And it says one chorus ruach. The same Mishnah says prior to that, one little whiff, one little exhaust smell of the next world from some small little mitzvah is greater than the whole pleasure of everything that you can find in this world from the beginning of history to the end of history if we pack it into one pill. From all the sports games and all the fun and all the parties and everything and all the ecstasy that we take, and we take it into one drug that everybody, all the pleasure and fun that anybody had from the beginning of history, it wouldn't equal one kors ruach, and yet one moment of tshuva and ma'asim tovim in this world. To steal one moment of life from your own beloved mother to bring about, you imagine the pain and the sorrow that would mean to him, but this guy saved his life. And the Mishnah says, Al tivaz l'chol adam, don't despise any person. Al tiflag l'chol davar, don't separate yourself from anybody, from anything. She'ein l'cha adam, she'ein lo shah. Every moment, every person has his moment. That was the person's moment over there. Ve'ein l'cha davar, she'ein lo makam. I'll tell you one last story and we'll finish up over here. I want to tell you that Rabbi Wallerstein with the double header tonight, those who are not aware of it. It's not double header tonight. Okay? It bees that way sometimes, okay? But al tivaz, don't bees, but al tivaz. Okay, so I'll just share with you one other story. I have a friend. His name is Eliezer. Okay, you can check these things out. I'll get you his number in Eretz Yisrael if you like. I just don't happen to have it on me right now. So, and every time I see him, I just want to make sure that I tighten up the screws of the story, that I get it straight. And I remember when he lived in Muncie, when I came into his house. He's got one of these pictures. You ever see? You ever have these family pictures, these black and whites, but they look like they were touched up in color a little bit. You know what I'm talking about, like an old family. And I come to his house and said, "Ellie, is that you?" He's a big, broad-shouldered fellow with dark skin, dark hair, short beard, portly fellow. I said, "That's a picture of you?" He says, "No." He says, "That's my grandfather." And then he tells me the following story. Now, when I go to his house in Eretz Yisrael, as soon as you come into his house, there's that picture, that giant photograph of his grandfather with his great-grandfather with a white beard and fiery eyes. He says, "Let me tell you something about my grandfather that you say I look so much alike." He tells me a story. Now, this story must be now maybe 35 years old. A fellow was getting married in Hartford, Connecticut, in a shul. In these out-of-town shuls, they don't have a beis chinka, and they have the shul They have the simcha hall downstairs, and the shul upstairs, and they also have the davening room for the weekday davening room. That's the general structure of these shuls. So he came to a wedding. A friend was getting married, and maybe some people looking around the room might be old enough to remember they wanted to do a certain shtick. There used to be a certain type of mitzvah dance that was very popular at the time, that was called the Techias HaMesim dance. Anybody remember the Techias HaMesim dance? It's an old vaudevillian routine where they have a couple of guys like Keystone Cops, running around, and they chase one guy who's like acting like he's a drunk, and finally, they're chasing him, and they're playing the klezmer music behind, and finally they catch the guy, and some fake guns go off, and they have like a little funeral, and they put a flower, and they do and somebody does a eulogy, and next thing you know, he stands up, he starts running around again. They start chasing him even after they're sad that he's gone. It's a whole routine, like that. That was one of the shtick that used to do that you never see anymore. There, I said it. It's called the Techias HaMesim dance. In order to dress up the dance a little bit, sometimes you need some props, you need some stuff. So in order for the funeral part to have a little bit the tom of realism, they said, let's see if we can get it. My friend said, let me see if I get a kittel. We'll dress him up in a kittel, and we'll do the levaya part. We'll make it realistic. So he departs from the chasana area, and he goes upstairs to the shul area, and he starts peeking inside where the people keeping their talesim and everything. He starts looking inside the stenders. Then there's the gabbai of the shul. There's always that gabbai of the shul. He's the candy man. He's very nice, but he's also watching out if you leave your hand too long in the pushka. There's always that guy. Are you taking in? You're putting out. What are you doing? You're leaning back in the chair, machagrida here and machagrida shushing, but he's talking. One of these guys. So he bumps into so suddenly he gets caught red-handed by this European fellow standing there saying, "Oh, we caught the gunner right here," And my friend Eli said, "No," he said, "What are you doing here?" My friend said, "Eli, I came to get a kittel because I'm here for the wedding, and we wanted to do the Techias HaMesim dance." Yeah, we've heard that story so many times before, He caught you red-handed. The guy's not accepting any excuses. No, really, my friend Eli is a very sensitive mu'urvim abrios. He knows exactly, how to take the temperature of people. And he realized this fellow's talking to him. Let me not, argue on the facts of the point. Let me engage him in a little personal conversation. He says he sees he has a Yiddish accent. He says, no, Rabbi Yid, from the kids, where do you come from? And the fellow says, I come from Hungary. He mentions, He says, no, which city in Hungary? Fellow mentioned the name of a city. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the city. And Eli says, "You're from that city?" Eli says, "My mother just passed away last year." Now she's from that city. He says, "Your mother's from this?" He says, "What was the family name?" He says, "Friedman." He says, "David Friedman?" He says, "That was my grandfather." He says, "You look just like him." He says, "I know. I have a picture. I look exactly like him. We're almost like twins, like brothers." He says, "That's right." He says, I feel like he's standing right in front of me now, looking at you. He says, "He was a wealthy man. You know that." He says, "I heard. I never met him. Of course, he perished during the war." He says, and he supported all the good things that happened in the city, everything. All the learning, the charities and everything, the institutions, the mikveh, everything. He was paying for everything. He ran the city. He was everything good in the city came from him. He said, "I heard many things about him. I'm so happy to hear some more, information about him." This fellow gets white like a ghost, and he says the following thing. He says, "I want to tell you something." He says, "I'm one of the only survivors from this town." He says, "I came back after the war to the town. Everything and everybody was gone. I came to the shul, and I started foraging through the shul to see what I could find." He says, "Sefer Torah, forget about it. Everything was gone, ravaged. A paper, looking for even a page from a siddur, nothing. Something I could hold on to." He says, "The only thing that was standing," he says, "where your grandfather used to stand," he says, "was his shtender. And I went into his shtender, and the only thing that was there was a kittel." He says, "I took your grandfather's kittel. And in the DP camps," I get chills through my body, "in the DP camps," he says, "I was in charge," he says, and I performed thousands of weddings. He says, that the chassan wore your grandfather's kittel until it was worn threadbare. He said it had to be buried with shemus. And here it is, 30 some odd years later. He says his grandchild comes to me at a wedding here in Hartford, Connecticut, looking for a kittel in order to perform a mitzvah tans of Techiyas HaMesim. Right? You see how Kadosh Baruch Hu is weaving a story together over here, and everything that's happening. Sometimes we don't see all the different pieces that are going on in a puzzle, but it's a very, very tight puzzle. We don't always see how tight the puzzle is. And I heard recently, someone said a very, very shayna vort. I always understood that why is Devarim? Why is Devarim? Devarim means to speak, right? Eila Devarim. Devarim means speech. Why is Devarim called Devarim? Because when a person speaks, like when this man said to me, Label, I would, it just all he said was words. I think it was Rudyard Kipling, the famous English writer, poet. He said that words are the most intoxicating drug in the world. Right? Someone says, I love you. You're on cloud 9. Someone says, you're hired. Wow. Someone says, you're fired. Change that first letter. Whoa, Give me a bottle. Just the difference of a word can make a difference in somebody's life. Wow. Because words are not words. They're things. But I just now heard the opposite, which is also true. That everything is a davar. Every dibor is a davar, but every davar is a dibor, because everything in the world is speaking to us. If a person puts on the right pair of glasses, you realize that everything we see is saying something to us. Right? Everything that we hear, and everybody we meet has something that they're meant to say to us. And that's what I think he's speaking about over here, Ben Azai. He says to keep your eyes alert. If it's in a Kodesh Baruch Hu's world, then it's a little squiggly that a Kodesh Baruch Hu put on the blackboard that's meant for us to see and meant for us to understand. Don't erase that blackboard. Don't think, what's this person, what's that? We don't know what the value is. Sometimes we may not know the value now. We'll know about it later on. Sometimes it may be more valuable than we think it is. It's an antique shop. Don't throw it out yet. It might be a Picasso that's under it. It might be something very, very valuable. You meet somebody, don't dismiss him. Don't dismiss anybody. You never know what the value of that person is. He's a worker. He's a janitor. Don't be dismissive to the janitor. You're going to need the key to the bathroom or something sometime. You're going to need something. He's going to play an important role. You never know. So these are just some stories to see how important every little thing that we do. And that's what the Mishnah says. It says, Al tihi vaz l'chol adam. Don't be disparaging to anybody. Al tihi maflig l'chol davar. Don't be despising yourself, distance yourself from anything. She'ein lecha adam, she'ein lo shah. There's not one person that doesn't have his moment. Ve'ein lecha davar. There's no davar. Everything's a davar. Everything's a dibor. Everything is speaking to us. She'ein lo makom. Okay, shkoyach guys.